Russia and Ukraine have had a long relationship. Even like Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, and it's kind of gone back and forth. Like in the last 500 years, pretty much Ukraine has been attacked and been controlled by like every single one of its neighbors. Like it was part of the Polish Empire, it was part of the Lithuanian Empire, it was part of the Russian Empire, and then spurts of it being a free country in between all of those things. And so it's always kind of been the show where it's very close and intermingled because they are Eastern Slavs, just like the Russians and the Belarusians and Belarus. And so they've always had a very close relationship. And I mean, just like any political thing, there's people who are for what's going on and think it's a good change. There's people who are against it. But at least, I mean, I recently returned. I spent the entire summer in Moscow. So I was in Russia, and I didn't feel any political tensions there as an American. I went to the Crimea this summer, and for all I know, I may have been the only American in the entire peninsula at the time. I don't know, but and there were like even though that had just switched and they'd just switched over from using the hryvnia, which is the Ukrainian currency, to the ruble, which is the Russian currency, and all those things, and transitioning from being a part of Ukraine to being part of Russia, there wasn't any political tension there as well. So it's in the day-to-day life for many people, things haven't really changed. For others, I mean, they've really been struggling a lot and really suffering. Like I have some friends who, they weren't able to talk to their family for like 6 months because they were completely cut off, or they were sitting in their apartment and their building got shot up, kind of thing. And so it is a very real thing. Like all political things, people have different opinions on it, whether it's good, whether it's bad. But the members of the church have been very, very good about not worrying about who's right and who's wrong, but just really taking people in and taking, members who are fleeing as refugees from the war zone to, take them in and make sure that everyone is taken care of and helping people. So it's really focusing just on the safety of the people rather than, who's right and who's wrong, and just that'll eventually sort itself out one way or the other. But I think it's really hard without being there to even really know what's going on. Just because I think, news outlets kind of spin things the way they want it to be said. So if you watch the Russian news or the Ukrainian news and the American news, you'll get three very different stories. And so I think it's really hard to know what's actually kind of really the truth of what's going on.
As far as the cities and kind of the way that people just live in Ukraine, the cities are a little bit different than they are here, especially if you're in Utah. I mean, the streets are all very broad and very straight and things like that, whereas in Ukraine they're winding and they're really kind of older and they're very, very narrow. And the traffic there, very few people have cars, and so I have no idea why there are so many cars on the street, because it always seems like the streets were just packed with cars. But I knew very few people who actually had a car, so I don't know where all the other cars were coming from. But then in the cities, there are a lot of huge apartment buildings, just tons of really tall, big apartment complexes. They're usually made out of some sort of concrete, and just very, very big. There are also a lot of older, kind of more European style looking buildings, some that were built in the 1800s and the 1700s, and it's really cool to kind of see that and to think, oh my goodness, this has been around as long as my country has existed, and it's kind of cool. It's neat to get that sense of history. And the people there, like I said, very few of them have cars, and so they'll usually either walk or they'll take public transportation. They have a really good public transportation system. They have these things called marshrutkhi, which are kind of like buses, but a little bit different, kind of a little smaller. That's probably the primary form of public transportation, and you can get a marshrutka that takes you anywhere in the city, generally, if you know where it's going. They'll have signs in the window that tell you the different stops that they'll go to. And they also have trolley buses, which just kind of run up and down the streets on their little electric wires. And so you'll see a lot of people who will be walking around or taking those. The people They dress a lot more nicely than we do here in America, in the sense of it's rare to see people who would go outside in just like a t-shirt and jeans and then just like tennis shoes or something. They'll usually wear nicer shoes, like, and they'll take good care of their shoes. It's a really big deal to polish your shoes in Ukraine. It's a really big deal. And so I would definitely say for missionaries who are going there to make sure that they keep their shoes polished. But also, you know, if you're going to go do a service project or something like that, you might feel a little bit out of place because you'll be walking around just like in your t-shirt and maybe jeans and your tennis shoes or something. And you'll look around and you'll notice that everybody else looks a lot more put together than you do. But it's kind of cool that they consider it kind of an act of respect to the people that they'll be seeing outside. So even just to go to the grocery store or something like that, people will tend to dress up for that, and you'll see people walking around in suits or things all the time, just kind of to show some respect. I thought that was an interesting part of the culture. Also, because they do walk around so much, the streets almost always have people on them. So that's good for missionary purposes. You can contact the people who are there, and you'll for sure find some people. But you'll also learn that there are certain areas that are too busy for contacting. If you stop, then people will bump into you. And you'll find that there are some places where there are very few people walking around. So you kind of learn how to tell the places that have a lot of people walking there, but not necessarily too many. And those are usually like the parks and things like that. Those are usually the better areas for missionary work for contacting purposes.
In eastern Ukraine, the biggest motivator for the beginning for the church was actually the young ambassadors. They came through and they did a dancing tour. And in Donetsk, everyone was thrilled. They thought this was amazing. Didn't immediately have the opportunity to preach the gospel, but many of them stayed in contact with some of these young ambassadors and would accept missionaries later on. Before the war and the rebellion happened in Donetsk, there were enough people to gather a stake. This had happened beforehand. The history of the church in Donetsk is that once there was announced to be a stake and a temple going into Kiev, many people left and went to Kiev because they felt like that was Zion, that was the promised land. And so even though Donetsk had a very high baptism rate for a long time, there was a tendency for people to get baptized in Donetsk and Kharkov and then move to Kiev. Which is good for Kiev. They have a very strong membership there. But it was something that we struggled with for a while. Kind of like the people who would keep on moving away to go to Utah in the old days. Kiev was the new Zion. But Donetsk in and of itself has a lot of people who are very humble. The industry there is all metalworking and mining. When you go up north to Kharkov and Sumy, it's a little bit different. They have more of a college town, there's more industrial works, or it's a farming community and it's not very big. But down south, it's very much centered around industry, around metals, around mining. And it reflects in the people. You'll often see men with lots and lots of black, as if they were putting on very heavy mascara all around their eyes. That's not mascara, it's coal dust. And so they're often very strong and very tired from the work that they've been doing. The members, though, one of the things that was common in the Donetsk mission when I was there is that we had one of the highest sacrament meeting attendance rates for non-members. We were always inviting people. We were always inviting people, and people were always coming because the members were welcoming and open to people. You sometimes get accustomed to thinking of Russians as everything you see on the movies, where they are nothing but beard and vodka and snow and hating life. And that's not true. There's so much joy and happiness that sometimes as soon as you get through that first crust, that first sort of rocky, I don't know who you are, I don't know if I can trust you, if you're part of the KGB coming to arrest me or not. which was a real problem. There's still a tradition where you do not shake hands through a doorway. And that started after 1918, because what would happen is that in order to fill an arrest quota, they would arrest you and they would just pull you by your arm out of your apartment so that they could make an arrest without having invaded your home. So technically keeping the law. And so now, even now, it's considered impolite to shake hands through a doorway. You step inside. And that's very much a sort of common theme to the culture. On the outside, they may seem distant, but once you get inside, they are your friend for life. There's a saying that they have that a man can only have one or two friends. And the word for friend, drug, is actually from an older word, družina, which means bodyguard. They consider you to be a very true friend and very dear. For this reason, many of the members will still remember who their missionaries were. And they are still very dedicated to the missionaries, and they want to help, and they want to be of any use that they can. Because they feel that since you are a missionary, that you are also their friend. And so they are very willing to protect you, to keep you under their wing, to feed you lots. But that's a spirit that they very much have. Another thing that I hadn't expected is how powerful the influence of the temple is. The Kiev temple was dedicated in 2010. Many of the members stayed for all 3 sessions. Whether or not they knew both Russian and Ukrainian, many of the people in the East only know Russian. They know Ukrainian because it was taught to them in schools, and so they can understand it basically, but they speak Russian. But it didn't matter, because the temple was coming. The Russian Orthodox and the Ukrainian Orthodox faiths do believe in the importance of marriage. There are 2 different kinds of priesthood. In order to be part of the higher priesthood, you must be married. It's understood that you cannot understand how to lead a congregation as a priest unless you are married and experiencing the same things, unless you have children. The word for marriage, when not in a secular sense, in a religious sense, is venchania. It means crowning. They have a lot of teachings that are very related to the temple and are very strong, and it touches their heart. Their favorite hymn is If You Could Hide a Kolob. They believe in the eternities. They are very open to this. And if you are willing to talk to them about the doctrines that they already have, the truths they already know, they'll be very open to your message.
Ukrainian and Russian culture are very, very, very similar. I mean, there's a few foods that Ukrainians eat more of than Russians, but they grow up watching the same cartoons, they read the same authors, they're very, it's pretty similar, especially Eastern Ukraine. The further east you travel in Ukraine, the more Russian it becomes. And so there's people, like on my mission, there'd be people, when you're talking to people on the street and buying something, they would tell you the price, and they would say 2 rubles instead of 2 hryvnia, because they would, even just say using the Russian word for the Russian currency, just because they were very Russian. So it's culturally, they are almost identical in many ways. So whether it's you're going to Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, you're gonna pretty much run into the same things and find the same culture. And I think that's pretty general across many Soviet countries, just since they were one country for so long, that it kind of, just the way of doing things kind of bled. And they, as in the Soviet Union, many foods from the other native people kind of became popular, plov, which is a rice dish from Uzbekistan, is very popular throughout all of Russia and Ukraine now, just because when Uzbekistan, as it was part of the Soviet Union, it kind of spread. So it's kind of, I think there's more of a Soviet culture, so more so than a specific Russian or Ukrainian culture, and they've all kind of influenced each other.
A lot of people kind of have preconceived notions about Eastern Europeans in general. You watch a lot of movies, and Russians are always the bad guys. They kind of always got that mean, stern, scary voice. And I remember at first, I definitely kind of felt that on the streets. People are not used to talking to strangers at all. It's just kind of left over from the Soviet culture that you try to talk to someone on the street. I feel like in America, if you're trying to talk to someone on the street And even in California, I noticed this. They're a lot more receptive to just talking to a stranger. Even if they're not interested, they'll at least give you a couple minutes. Or if you knock on the door, they'll let you talk for a bit. And if it's like a hot day, if you ask for a glass of water, they'll give you one usually. In Ukraine, it wasn't like that as much. There were definitely more people like to keep to themselves. And especially on some cold winter days, it'd be rough when you're out contacting all day, trying to talk to people and nobody wants to talk to you. And at first, that can be kind of off-putting. You think, oh, these people aren't nice, blah, blah, blah. But one thing I really noticed pretty soon on after meeting with investigators and members and just talking to a lot of people in general is that deep down they're just as genuine as any other person out there. They're actually some of the nicest people I've ever met. It's just kind of more of a different culture, really. Where in America, people, I feel like, can tend to be a bit more, I don't want to say fake, but fake in the sense that they'll be nice to you, but in reality, they might not actually care about you. In Ukraine, if they don't care about you, they probably won't talk to you. But once they care about you, once they know you, they'll treat you like family. And that I noticed was very interesting, that we'd teach some investigators that, 3 weeks earlier, I hadn't known them at all. But they'd been nice enough to let us in, and we'd talk. And after 3 weeks, they felt almost like an uncle or something like that. They just felt really close. I remember in particular there was one investigator me and a companion taught. He was actually homeless at the time. He lived in the boiler room of a car wash that was right next to our apartment. So he would work for the car wash and they'd let him stay in the boiler room. I don't know if that was the best deal he could get, but I mean that's what he had. And we had there's a lot of rough times in that area in the sense that we wouldn't have a lot of new investigators. So we'd see him a lot. And I remember my companion and I got very, very close to him. There was one point where he hadn't eaten in a few days at all, just because he hadn't had the money to get food. So I remember one morning, me and my companion we made some breakfast, and he went and had breakfast with him that morning. That we made for him and had a lesson with him that morning. And honestly, that was one of the best feelings I'd ever had. It was just really just doing something completely selfless for someone else, and I just got a glimpse of how God loves people, that no matter how imperfect people are, no matter what they've gone through, no matter what dumb decisions they've made, that at the end they're still God's children and God still loves them. And that obviously we're not perfect like God, but we should learn to have some of that same charity for other people. And just noticing, talking to all these people that had been through a lot, really. Ukraine has been through a really violent past, going back and forth throughout history between different wars and battles, and then the Soviet Union, coming out of the Soviet Union. It's just been the government's been full of just back and forth, never really been 100% stable. And especially when I left, obviously, there was people wanting to break off from the country. There was a huge separatist movement to join Russia, and Russia was sending, not officially, but we're sending people over to kind of start riots and kind of get that action going. So I just felt for these people a lot, because there are people that, even though they might seem hard at first, were just very loving, very genuine people. And seeing them go through more and more hardships like this just makes you sad, because these people you've worked so hard to care for and love, that you served and been alongside, you see them going through all these problems that you wouldn't even think of going through back home. I remember when I moved to California, people would joke wow, you went from one crazy place to probably the quietest place you could go, Bakersfield, California. People don't really talk about Bakersfield that much. And it was true. It was funny. I'm sure the church wanted to keep us somewhere safe after being there. It got pretty violent after we left. But it just made me realize how blessed we are to live in a safe place, because there's all types of terrible things going on throughout the world that you don't even realize. The news doesn't even cover everything. You have to be there. And once you've actually met these people and seen what they've gone through, you realize just the drastic difference.
It's definitely a different culture there. I definitely picked up on some of the cultural isms in Ukraine. For example, you never wear your shoes in the house. So as soon as you enter someone's home, you take your shoes off and they give you slippers. So they are amazing hosts. They will always give you slippers or a robe if you're cold. They'll feed you tea and cookies. You'll never leave a Ukrainian's house hungry. They'll always feed you at least something little. They're very conscious about health. So if you're feeling sick, they want to do anything to make you feel better. They'll give you their remedies. They'll give you tea. They will do anything for you. They're very concerned when, like, if you're outside, if your hair's wet in the winter, they're very concerned that you're going to get sick, or they'll give you their scarf because they're afraid that you're going to get sick from your neck being exposed. Or also, if you're not wearing a hat in the winter, they will honestly give you their own hat or give you their own jacket. So they're very generous people. And they're health conscious in the way that they don't ever sit on the ground because it's dirty. They don't sit on cold benches just because they worry about that affecting their health. Ukrainians are, like, they may seem not open at first. I mean, oftentimes they do, but if they don't, once you become friends with them and once you do gain their trust and you show an interest in them, like, they're your best friend forever. Like, they will trust you with anything and they expect you to be their friend for a very long time. So I've been lucky in the sense that I've been able to stay in contact with many people from my mission since I returned home, and they're like the most loyal friends in the whole world. They will keep in contact with you. They want to know how you're doing. They want to continue talking with you. So I'm lucky to be able to still talk to them all the time.
They're very upfront. If you're going to stop someone and tell them you want to teach them about Christ, they'll probably tell you, I already know about Christ. What do you have to tell me? They're very Christian people. They value the family. They do not like anything that kind of goes against the idealistic Christian views, you know? And so things like I don't know, like homosexual marriage or things like that, that to them is they don't like that. And so when you talk with them, you have to make sure that you're very forward too. You have to help them understand exactly what you're thinking and what you're feeling, because they don't like to hide things. On the other hand, if you really want to help someone feel the Spirit, and you really want to get with someone like as a friend and help them understand these things, you have to help them trust you. There's a phrase that we had that was, a Ukrainian can smell insincerity from a mile away. So if you're not sincere, then you're not going to be very successful. So I guess that's why I say that you really need to focus on the Christ-like attributes. You need to be more Christ-like when you go out there, because they can tell, and it's real easy for them to tell. Overall, they appreciate humor. They're really funny people. They're the kind of people who will be your best friend for the rest of your life. I mean, I'm still friends with them on Skype, and they ask to talk with me all the time. They never forget a face. Like, they will see you. Like, if you contact a guy on the street, you have a good conversation with him, you see him a week later, he'll say hi to you. If it was a good conversation, he'll say hi to you. He remembers you. No problem. And they're just like that. They're really cool people. The members, if you were to say the members, and this is every Ukrainian actually, they're very strong with whatever they believe. So if they are a Greek Catholic, they are gung-ho Greek Catholic. They're not going to forget their religion, and they're all about it. If they are LDS, then they are LDS. I would say that's a general idea. There are a few exceptions, but they're very stuck on what they believe. Oh, yeah, that makes it really hard. You should try talking with a Ukrainian Jehovah's Witness. That's hard. They're nice people. It's just so hard. One of the guys who I got the chance to baptize, coolest guy ever, but like 3 days before his baptism, he fell off a 3rd-story roof and broke his ribs. And so we lost track of him for a week. And he showed up at the church. His ribs were still broken because he can't afford to get them fixed or anything like that. But he said, I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I need to get baptized. I already figured out this is right. So whatever happens to me, I got to get baptized. And so we baptized him, and that was intense. He's still active to this day. I actually saw a picture of him they just organized a district actually in our mission, which is huge. And he was actually at the meeting where they organized the district. Saw a picture of him in a suit. He's just completely different. So cool. I mean, and so that's one big thing, that when I was heading out on my mission, people told me you will never really see a whole lot of baptisms. That was totally wrong. That was terrible. I don't know why someone said that to me, but if you go to this mission, you will see baptisms. That's something that's for sure. People will get baptized.